Hi again everyone, just another video for the Assess Coexisting Needs, and this is revisiting the case study assessment, particularly the Ron and Holly. And now the last part 3, is where you consult with one of your classmates, or I can guess you can consult with more than one, and I'll have the team's meeting for next week when I'm away in the morning. You'll be able to access that and consult with each other if that's one option. And it's good, obviously, to consult with people to find the differences that you might have come up with. And I know there may be a lot of similarities, but someone may have seen something slightly different or interpret something slightly different, and that's actually really good, and that gives you something to bounce some ideas and discuss any of those differences about. Yeah, and just a little reminder, it's that in the afternoon, Jim Campbell, next week when I'm away, my first week away, he will start at 12:30 and go for the afternoon and look at the new unit, the networking, which, you know, you're really lucky to have Jim, I feel, because he knows this unit inside out. He's a really good networker in the community in his various roles over the years. But I'll let him introduce himself. But all I'll say is that, yeah, it's a great opportunity and something that I'm very pleased that Jim's able to step in and help out in this regard. Consultation. So you've actually got to consult with both the stuff that you've come up with for Ron and Holly, and you know there are some obviously slight differences, broadly speaking. You know, Ron being male, old, alcohol and drug sort of stuff going on there, mental health, just a brief summary, and Holly being a younger woman, Indigenous woman, been in care, mental health stuff again, has a young child. So a little bit different sort of services in particular, and some of the options. But when you have this analysis and you start talking to each other and comparing the notes and coming up with answers. So part A, so the sort of things that they would like you to discuss is the sorts of policies and procedures that you might consider as important for each client. So in Ron's case, and just referring to we had our tables that we developed to help guide this thing, and some of them off the top of my head. There was the duty of care, rights and responsibilities, the client intake, confidentiality, etc., etc. So you've got a list of all those, and just checking what you identified. So you've got to do this twice in a sense, once for Ron and then for Holly, and identifying what policies and procedures you thought were going to be very important in that particular situation. In terms of whatever client background notes or client's information you thought was important, that's really good. And referral information, I'm thinking they would like that to be discussed here. So up front, the services that you're thinking that you may be options to refer both Ron and Holly to. So we've got different services there. Sort of consent is important, so how that would be done, what form, or the process there. I guess that Indigo bank of forms and policies and procedures do have that consent form, and how they would make sure that was done. And perhaps I guess thinking about how you just contact Ron and Holly to get them to come in and meet with you, because in a sense you're taking over their cases now. And so some of that other stuff that would be important is, you know, who you spoke to. This is the sort of info you probably had at some point, but who you spoke to in terms of getting your background information. So they both had different caseworkers that were identified in their notes. And then I've also got something to consider just about how do you make the environment welcoming and where you might meet Ron and Holly. So just the setup of the room, accessibility. I don't know if there's anything around accessibility. Has Holly got the younger child, and whether, you know, it's a time when that child is in care, daycare, or is there some sort of childcare provision available at the service to support Holly access and have that discussion. Okay, part B, discuss your assessment analysis with your peer. Did they agree with your case analysis, referral ideas, and identification of the coexisting needs? You know, again, it's Ron and Holly, so who were you thinking of in terms of those referral points? And in Ron's case, just off the top of my head, you might have been thinking about the AOD sort of issues, or the isolation, and how you prioritise those, and obviously the mental health. So there's the coexisting needs there: mental health, isolation, using the alcohol and other drugs. That's that analysis of those coexisting needs and whether you agree totally on those or what you might prioritise. And I guess in terms of the referrals that you make, that gives some sort of indication of your prioritisation perhaps. And in Ron's case, he tried to attend a day program for his addiction, some sort of like a support group, if you'd say, that he didn't have to do anything other than attend, which did prove something, a little bit difficult for him in the end. And so, is it worth considering, in his case, something where he maybe went into a residential for a while? Is that possible? I know he's interested, he's really concerned about other things and whether, he'd be willing to that. And if he could agree, is that the way that you go? And off the top of my head, We Help Ourselves at Cessnock, a residential program. Duralong has been mentioned, that's more down the Central Coast, but again, it's residential. Odyssey House was another one that came up. So, there are options for residential. You might think, there's another approach, and that's all good. And similarly with Holly, that analysis of what is the most pressing need for Holly and where it might be those referrals be. And, are you leading down the track of looking at her education, or perhaps looking at some of those Aboriginal education services that are might support her to get a foot in the world, or is it more around the mental health support or something else? So have those good discussions. Your colleague that you're consulting with saw it this way, and I can see how that might be appropriate. And you might change your thinking based on that discussion. C, briefly outline any changes you made to your assessment based on your consultation with your colleague, and then any services or referrals. So look, working through this, and again, obviously Ron and Holly, but it's saying to reflect and evaluate whether you would change any of your thinking based on what someone else was suggesting. So again, that's really valuable. So it's sort of saying, what would you might actually do to change, and give a little bit of a reasoning behind that. That's that critical reflection. And I guess I was taught that critical reflection is sort of asking yourself, is it good enough, or could it be better? So, coming from that perspective. D is saying, review your initial assessment after meeting with your peers, what changes you would make to the case plan draft and referrals identified prior to the meeting with the client. What evidence did you use to inform your judgment, and have your recommendations changed or remained the same? Why or why not? Again, it's you needing to justify why you might change your viewpoint or your approaches. Is it about just making some comment on the original documents that you used to come up with the original idea? So you were reading some of the case notes for both Ron and Holly, and there was some intake information for Ron, similar for Holly, I think. But you were making an assessment based on all those comments and entries and that information, but you may have changed your idea, and you also just outlining that you may have changed your direction that you might go, and that might in turn mean that you've changed the referral that you were thinking to another one, and just giving that outline as to why you might have made that change. Part E. So in preparation for meeting the client, identify and list strategies that you would use to empower the client to prioritise their needs. Empowering someone to have choice, and the word empowerment gets thrown around, but I think it's about choice, and maybe presenting the pros and cons, or working through the pros and cons with Ron and Holly. If it was an AOD approach for Ron, having an open discussion about, what got in the way of doing the support group approach, coming in, meeting, it seemed to get a little bit tricky. And again, you obviously can't force Ron, but maybe it's about talking through the option of, if he went into a live-in residential program, would that be a way for him to stick with it? Giving him that option, all the information, maybe more than one option. Maybe it's Odyssey House and We Help Ourselves, as well as Duralong. And he has a look, and he might say, no, I don't want to do any of those, and that's okay, but he bases his decision, it's his decision, on all the information that you can provide him. Okay, so the second point is saying, what needs that you would discuss with Ron and Holly to assist them to recognise. So I guess it's having those open discussions around whether it's alcohol and drugs, the mental health, and I guess using that person-centered motivational interviewing, which is that open question approach in a short way or a short summary, using good open questions to help people explore things. So maybe for Holly, it's those sort of questions. What are the things that you think you could do to provide a really good environment for your daughter? Asking Ron and Holly what it is they prioritise, what's their most important thing they want to address first. And so working with them to identify what it is that they want to deal with first, what's the most important thing, and working from that perspective. And I guess the final thing that you can do is just double check that the things that you might identify as priorities from all the information you've got, is that similar or different to the person that you're consulting with, your peer from the class? Are you coming up with a little bit of a different priority? Are you leaning towards mental health or alcohol and drugs, or getting a washing machine, or getting an education, making connections in the community, getting a mental health plan? Which way were you leaning? Is your colleague leaning the same way? And how much choice does your client have in, saying, I disagree, or I agree, or I see it this way and I see it another way? But again, those good open conversation skills, active listening, person-centered approach, and using those good open questions and reflective questions, getting people to imagine or tell you what they think is the best way to go. All right, I'm going to leave it there. Hopefully that is a little help. Toodle pips.